The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a vast bowl made of silver and glass. Hundreds of seats rose in circles around the center stage where speakers would stand. Each seat held a different kind of alien being, some tall and thin, others short and wide, many with extra arms or legs or eyes. The air buzzed with the sound of translation machines turning alien languages into words that all species could understand. Jake Morrison walked to the center platform, his black shoes clicking on the smooth floor. He wore his best blue uniform, the one with gold buttons that caught the light from the ceiling above. Behind him, his assistant Lisa Parker carried a stack of data tablets, her brown hair tied back in a neat bun. She had worked with Jake for 3 years and knew how these meetings usually went. The council members watched, Jake with the same look people might give a child who wanted to join an adult conversation. Some seemed bored. Others looked annoyed that they had to be here at all. A few were checking their personal devices, not even pretending to pay attention. Speaker Vorthka sat in the largest chair at the front of the hall. He was a Valkyrie, which meant his skin looked like it was made of colored crystals that changed from blue to green to purple as he moved. He had 4 arms instead of 2, and each one was longer than a human arm. His species had been part of the council for over 1,000 years, and he never let anyone forget it. The council will now hear from the human delegation, Vorthka said, his voice echoing through the hall. The translation machine made his words sound flat and emotionless, but Jake could hear the real tone underneath. It was the same tone a teacher might use when dealing with a slow student. Jake stepped up to the microphone. He had given speeches like this dozens of times before, but today felt different somehow. Maybe it was because this request was so simple, so reasonable that even the council would have to approve it. Or maybe it was because he was tired of asking permission for things that should have been automatic. Honored council members, Jake began, keeping his voice steady and respectful, humanity comes before you today with a request that we believe serves the interests of all species in our sector. We wish to establish mining operations in the Kepler 442 system. A few council members shifted in their seats. The Zek representative, a creature that looked like a giant praying mantis with silver skin, clicked his mouth parts together. Jake had learned that this sound meant either interest or amusement, and he was never sure which. The system in question, Jake continued, contains 17 planets and 43 moons, most of which are rich in metals and rare elements that could benefit trade throughout this sector of the galaxy. Human mining techniques are clean, efficient, and cause minimal environmental impact. Jake gestured to Lisa, who activated a holographic display above the center platform. Images of the Kepler 442 system appeared in the air, showing each planet and moon in detail. The display highlighted the locations of valuable minerals and showed how human mining equipment would extract them without damaging the surrounding environment. As you can see, Jake said, pointing to the display, our proposed mining sites are located on worlds that have never supported life. There are no existing colonies, no historical sites, and no environmental concerns that would affect neighboring systems. This was true, and Jake knew it. His team had spent months preparing this presentation, checking every detail, making sure there could be no possible objection to their request. The Kepler 442 system was perfect for mining operations. It was close to human space, rich in resources, and completely uninhabited. Speaker Vorthka leaned forward in his chair, his crystal skin shifting to a darker shade of blue. Ambassador Morrison, the Council appreciates humanity's thorough preparation. However, we must consider the broader implications of your request. Jake felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. Here it comes, he thought. There's always something. The system you wish to mine borders the territories of 3 established species, Vorthka continued. The Sorek have expressed concerns about the impact on their nearby trading routes. The Nethrim worry about atmospheric disturbances affecting their gas collection operations. And the Zek have raised questions about the cultural significance of the region? Jake blinked. Cultural significance? The Kepler 442 system was empty space with some rocks floating around a star. There was no culture there because there was no life there. There never had been. Speaker Vorthka, Jake said carefully, I'm not sure I understand the cultural concerns. Our surveys show that the system has been uninhabited for its entire history. There are no archaeological sites, no historical markers, no evidence of any past civilization. The Zek representative, whose name was KL Katateta, spoke up. His translated voice sounded like metal scraping against metal. The absence of physical evidence does not negate spiritual significance, Ambassador. The Zek people have long considered that region of space to be touched by the memory of the Ancient Ones. Jake stared at the giant insect creature, the Ancient Ones. He had never heard of any ancient civilization in that area. In fact, he was pretty sure the Zek had made up this spiritual significance about 5 minutes ago. Of course, Jake said, his diplomatic training kicking in. Humanity has great respect for the spiritual beliefs of all species. Perhaps we could discuss ways to honor these concerns while still proceeding with our mining operations? This was how these meetings always went. Jake would present a reasonable request, backed by months of research and preparation. The council would raise unexpected objections that seemed designed to make things as difficult as possible. Then Jake would spend hours negotiating compromises for problems that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Representative HSS Kamor, a Sorek with green scales and yellow eyes, raised one of his clawed hands. The Sorek delegation also wishes to express concern about human mining techniques. While Ambassador Morrison claims these methods are safe, the Sorek have historical experience with species who promise environmental protection but deliver ecological disaster. Jake's jaw clenched slightly, but he forced himself to stay calm. Representative HSS Kamor, humanity has operated mining facilities in 17 different systems over the past 20 years. In every case, we have exceeded environmental safety standards and left the surrounding area cleaner than we found it. I would be happy to provide detailed reports from any of these operations. Reports prepared by humans, Sheskmore replied, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. The Sorek prefer independent verification of such claims. Independent verification, Jake knew what that meant. It meant months of delays while council inspectors who knew nothing about mining examined every piece of equipment and every safety protocol. It meant explaining basic engineering concepts to bureaucrats who would then spend weeks debating whether humans were qualified to use their own technology. Lisa leaned forward and whispered in Jake's ear, Sir, we have 17 different alien species who have already certified our mining safety standards. The reports are in the appendix. Jake nodded and gestured to the holographic display. The council will find that our mining operations have been independently verified by 17 different species, including the Velkari Environmental Protection Agency and the Zek Industrial Safety Commission. All reports are available for review. Speaker Vorthka's skin shifted to a shade that Jake had learned meant he was thinking. After a long moment, he spoke. The council appreciates humanity's preparation. However, given the complex nature of this request and the concerns raised by multiple species, we believe a more thorough review is necessary. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of review, Speaker? The council proposes the formation of a special committee to study the environmental, cultural, and economic implications of human mining operations in the Kepler 442 system. This committee would include representatives from all affected species and would be empowered to conduct on-site inspections and interviews. How long would this review take? Jake asked, though he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. Such matters require careful consideration, Vorthka replied. The council estimates that a thorough review could be completed within 18 to 24 standard months, 2 years. They wanted him to wait 2 years for permission to mine rocks in empty space. Jake felt his diplomatic smile become harder to maintain. Speaker Vorthka, Jake said, humanity has been a member of the Galactic Council for 37 years. In that time, we have never violated an environmental regulation, never failed to honor a treaty obligation, and never caused harm to another species through our industrial operations. Surely our track record warrants some consideration. The Nethrim representative, a being that looked like a floating jellyfish inside an environmental suit, spoke in a voice like whistling wind. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Ambassador Morrison. The Council's responsibility is to prevent problems, not simply respond to them after they occur. Jake felt his jaw tighten again. Behind him he could hear Lisa shifting uncomfortably. He could sense that his entire delegation was becoming tense, their patience wearing thin after hours of this bureaucratic dance. "Of course," Jake said, his voice still perfectly polite. "Humanity understands." The 10th hour of the council session had arrived, and Jake Morrison could feel the weight of exhaustion settling on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. The great hall still buzzed with the sound of translation machines, but now the noise seemed sharper, more irritating. His throat was dry from hours of speaking, and his feet ached from standing at the podium for so long. Lisa Parker had gone through 3 different sets of notes, organizing and reorganizing the data tablets as each new objection arose. She watched. Jake carefully, noting the small signs of strain that most people would miss. The way his left eye twitched slightly when Speaker Vorthka spoke. The way his hands gripped the edge of the podium just a little too tightly. The way his diplomatic smile had become more fixed, more artificial as the hours passed. Captain Roy Henderson sat in the 3rd row of the human delegation section, his military uniform crisp despite the long day. He had stopped taking notes an hour ago, instead watching the council members with the steady gaze of someone who had spent years studying potential enemies. His fingers drummed silently on his knee in a pattern that Lisa recognized as a nervous habit he had picked up during his years in the Space Navy. Dr. Patricia Wells, the human delegation's science advisor, occupied the seat next to Henderson. Her usually neat appearance had become slightly disheveled as she pulled tablet after tablet from her bag, producing scientific studies and environmental reports to counter each new council objection. Her stylus had left small dents in her notepad from the force of her writing. The council members themselves seemed to be enjoying the prolonged session. The Valkyrie delegation whispered among themselves in their crystalline voices, their skin shifting through various shades of what Jake had learned to recognize as amusement. The Zek representative had settled into a comfortable position, his insect-like limbs folded in a way that suggested he could continue this discussion for many more hours. The Council has reviewed humanity's environmental impact assessments, Speaker Vorthka announced, his forearms gesturing to the holographic displays that floated around the chamber. While these documents are thorough, we find several areas that require additional clarification. Jake forced himself to maintain his professional composure. Of course, Speaker Vorthka. Humanity is always willing to provide additional information to address the Council's concerns. The first concern involves the long-term atmospheric effects of human mining operations, Vorthka continued. While the proposed mining sites are located on airless worlds, the Council requires assurance that mining activities will not create dust clouds that could affect neighboring systems. Jake stared at the crystal-skinned alien. Dust clouds? They were talking about mining operations on worlds with no atmosphere, in a system that was light years away from any inhabited planets. The idea that rock dust could somehow travel through empty space and affect other solar systems was so absurd that Jake wasn't sure how to respond. Speaker Vorthka, Jake said carefully, the mining operations will take place in vacuum conditions. Without atmosphere, there can be no dust clouds. The extracted materials will be processed in sealed facilities and transported in enclosed cargo vessels. Nevertheless, Vorthka replied, the Council requires detailed modeling of all potential particle dispersion patterns, including solar, wind effects, and gravitational influences from nearby stellar objects. Lisa leaned forward and whispered urgently in Jake's ear. Sir, that kind of modeling would take months to complete and would cost more than the entire mining operation. Jake nodded slightly, acknowledging her concern, but kept his voice level. Humanity will be happy to provide the requested modeling. Data, however, given the complexity of such calculations, we estimate that preparation would require approximately 6 months. Acceptable, Vorthka said immediately. The Council also requires verification that human mining equipment meets current galactic safety standards for automated operations. Jake felt his stomach drop. Speaker Vorthka, all human mining equipment exceeds current galactic safety standards. We have certifications from 17 different species, including the Velkari Industrial Safety Commission. The Zek representative, KL Chi Theta, clicked his mandibles in what Jake now recognized as dismissive amusement. Ambassador Morrison, the Council is aware of these certifications. However, they are based on human-supervised operations. The Kepler-442 system is sufficiently distant from human space that direct supervision would be impractical. Therefore, the Council requires additional certification for fully automated mining operations. Fully automated? Jake repeated. Our mining operations are not fully automated. We maintain human supervisory staff at all mining sites. The Council has determined that the distance to the Kepler-442 system makes permanent human presence inefficient, KL Theta replied. Therefore, mining operations in that system must be designed for automated function with minimal human oversight. Jake's pen snapped in his hand. The sharp crack echoed through the chamber, causing several Council members to turn and look at him. The broken pieces of plastic and metal fell to the floor with small clicking sounds that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Lisa immediately offered him a replacement pen, but Jake waved her off. He stared down at the broken pieces for a moment, then looked back up at the Council members. Representative KL Chi Theta, Jake said, his voice carrying a slight edge that hadn't been there before. Humanity has never operated fully automated mining facilities. Our safety protocols, our environmental protection measures, and our quality control procedures all require human supervision. The Council is essentially asking us to completely redesign our mining operations to meet a requirement. That was never mentioned in any previous discussion. The Council's requirements evolve as new information becomes available, KL Chi Theta replied. Surely humanity can appreciate the need for flexible approaches to complex problems. Jake felt something hot and angry building in his chest. Behind him, he could hear Captain Henderson's fingers drumming faster on his knee. Dr. Wells had stopped searching through her tablets and was now staring directly at the Zek representative with an expression that would have made a shark nervous. Of course, Jake said, his diplomatic training still functioning despite the growing tension. Humanity always strives to accommodate reasonable requests from the Council. The emphasis on the word reasonable was slight, but Lisa caught it. She had worked with Jake long enough to recognize the warning signs. The ambassador's polite mask was beginning to develop cracks. The Council appreciates humanity's cooperative spirit, Speaker Vorthka said, apparently oblivious to the change in atmosphere. However, we have additional concerns that must be addressed. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Additional concerns? The Council requires assurance that human mining operations will not exceed 0.3% of total system resources annually, Vorthka announced. This limitation ensures that the Kepler-442 system remains available for future use by other species. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake stared at the Velkari speaker, trying to process what he had just heard. 0.3% of total system resources. That would make the entire mining operation economically pointless. The cost of establishing mining facilities, transporting equipment, and maintaining automated systems would far exceed any possible profit from such limited extraction. Speaker Vorthka, Jake said slowly, the limitation you propose would make mining operations economically unfeasible. The startup costs alone would exceed the value of extracted materials by a factor of 10. The Council understands that this may impact human profit margins, Vorthka replied. However, the Council's primary concern is ensuring equitable access to galactic resources for all species. Jake felt his jaw clench. Equitable access? Speaker Vorthka, humanity has requested mining rights to exactly 3 asteroids in the outer system. The rest of the 17 planets and 43 moons would remain completely untouched. How does limiting us to 0.3% of resources promote equitable access? The Council's wisdom has guided galactic resource management for over 3 millennia, Vorthka said, his crystal skin shifting to a shade that Jake recognized as smugness. Humanity would benefit from embracing our patient approach to development. Patient approach? Jake repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Representative Sheskmore, the Sorek delegate, chose that moment to add his own contribution to the discussion. The Council also suggests that humanity consider a more humble approach to galactic citizenship. Your species' aggressive tendencies are well documented, and the Council believes that resource limitations help encourage more peaceful behavior. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jake's hands were now folded on the podium, but Lisa could see the slight tremor in his fingers. Behind him, the entire human delegation had gone completely still. Not the relaxed stillness of patience, but the predatory stillness of hunters deciding whether to strike. Captain Henderson had stopped drumming his fingers, and was now sitting at attention, his eyes fixed on the Sorek representative with the focused intensity of a targeting system. Dr. Wells had set down her stylus, and was staring at HSSK more with the clinical detachment of a scientist studying a particularly interesting specimen. Jake Morrison straightened to his full height, and something fundamental shifted in the great hall of the Galactic Council. The change was subtle at first, like the moment before a storm when the air pressure drops and animals sense danger. But every being in the chamber felt it, even if they didn't understand what it meant. Representative Sheskmore, Jake said, his voice calm and measured, you mentioned humanity's military history. I think it's time we discussed that history accurately. Instead of relying on the sanitized versions that appear in council records, Lisa Parker felt her heart rate increase as she watched her boss transform before her eyes. For 3 years, she had seen Jake handle difficult negotiations with patience and careful diplomacy. She had never seen him like this, and she wasn't sure if she should be excited or terrified. Jake gestured to Captain Henderson, who stood with military precision and activated the holographic display system. The air above the center platform filled with star charts, battle formations, and tactical analyses that painted a very different picture than the one usually presented in diplomatic sessions. Let's start with the human Valkyrie border incident of 2387, Jake said, his voice taking on the cadence of a military briefing. Council records describe this as an example of human aggression where our forces responded unreasonably to peaceful Valkyrie expansion into the Tau Ceti system. Speaker, Vorthka's crystal skin began shifting through uncomfortable shades of blue and purple. The Council's historical archives clearly are incomplete. Jake interrupted smoothly, the first time in living memory that a human had cut off a council speaker mid-sentence. Captain Henderson, please show the council what actually happened at Tau Ceti. The holographic display shifted to show detailed records, medical reports, and evacuation footage that several council members had clearly never seen before. Images of human civilians being forcibly removed from their homes filled the air above the chamber. Emergency broadcasts from human colonies showed families fleeing advancing Valkyrie mining equipment. 300,000 humans were displaced from their homes, Jake continued, his voice carrying the professional detachment of someone discussing weather patterns. 47,000 casualties during what the Valkyrie called peaceful expansion. When human naval forces arrived, they found Valkyrie strip mining operations had already begun on inhabited worlds. The chamber was dead silent. Even the usual background hum of translation systems seemed muted. Several council members were staring at the holographic images with expressions ranging from surprise to what might have been shame. The human response, Captain Henderson added, his military bearing making him seem larger than his actual size, was to disable the mining equipment and establish protective perimeters around evacuation sites. Total Valkyrie casualties, 0. Property damage, 17 automated mining platforms. Recovery time for damaged equipment, 6 days. Jake stepped forward, his movement drawing every eye in the chamber. The Valkyrie response was to declare human forces unreasonably aggressive and demand council intervention to prevent further human violence against peaceful mining operations. Representative HSSK Moore's scales had shifted to a darker green, a color Lisa had learned indicated extreme discomfort in his species. The council's investigation concluded that human military action was excessive, Jake finished. Based on Valkyrie testimony that failed to mention the 300,000 displaced humans or the fact that their peaceful expansion involved bombing civilian evacuation sites. Dr. Patricia Wells stood up, her movement sharp and purposeful. She had abandoned her usual careful demeanor and now carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent years defending her work before hostile committees. "Since we're discussing historical accuracy," she said, her voice cutting through the chamber like a scalpel, "perhaps the council would like to review the Proxima biological incident." Several council members shifted uncomfortably. The Nethrum representative's environmental suit began cycling through rapid breathing patterns that Lisa recognized as panic responses. "The official record," Dr. Wells continued, "states that human scientists were conducting dangerous biological experiments that threatened galactic security. The actual situation was a human medical research station developing treatments for a plague that had already killed 2 million Sorek civilians." Representative HSSK Moore's forked tongue flicked out rapidly, tasting the air in what Jake knew was a stress response. The Council's Science Division determined that human research methods were too advanced for proper oversight. Dr. Wells interrupted. "The same oversight that spent 3 years debating whether to authorize emergency medical aid while Sorek children died from a completely preventable disease." The holographic display shifted again, showing medical records and mortality statistics that painted a devastating picture. Images of Sorek hospitals filled to capacity, emergency treatment centers overwhelmed by patients, and medical teams working around the clock to treat victims of a plague that could have been stopped months earlier. Human medical teams arrived in the Proxima system without council authorization, Dr. Wells said, her voice carrying the precision of someone reciting documented facts. "We treated over 400,000 Sorek patients, developed 3 different vaccines, and ended a plague that council medical experts had declared manageable with proper long-term planning." The council's response, Jake added, was to declare human medical research dangerous and demand that all future human biological work be subject to council oversight with an average approval time of 18 months. Jake stepped closer to the council seating area, and Lisa noticed that several members actually leaned back as he approached. The careful deference that had characterized human behavior in this chamber for decades was gone, replaced by something that made even large alien predators uncomfortable. "Let me share another historical example," Jake said, his tone conversational but carrying undertones that made the Zek representative's mandibles click nervously. The Vega System pirate crisis of 2391. Council records show that human naval forces responded aggressively to what was described as a minor criminal activity. Captain Henderson activated another display, this one showing tactical reports and casualty figures that made several council members visibly flinch. "Minor criminal activity," Henderson said, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone reading from an incident report. 47 merchant vessels destroyed. Over 12,000 civilian casualties. 6 different species trade routes completely shut down. Estimated economic damage, 400 billion galactic credits. The council response, Jake continued, was to form a committee to study the problem. Estimated time for committee formation, 6 months. Estimated time for initial recommendations, 18 months. Estimated time for implementation of solutions, 3 to 5 years. The holographic display shifted to show before and after images of the Vega system. The before images showed destroyed space stations, burning ships, and rescue operations pulling survivors from wreckage. The after images showed rebuilt trade stations, functioning shipping lanes, and bustling commercial activity. Human naval response time, 6 days, Henderson continued. Total engagement time, 43 hours. Pirate casualties, all of them. Civilian casualties during human intervention, 0. Time to restore full commercial operations, 2 weeks. The Council's official response, Jake said, was to censure human forces for excessive use of military force and to implement new regulations requiring Council approval for any naval operations lasting longer than 12 hours. Dr. Wells activated another display, this one showing medical and humanitarian statistics that painted an even starker picture. The Rigel Sector Plague Outbreak of 2393, she said. Council debate time, 18 months. Human response time, 47 hours. Estimated lives saved by human medical intervention, 14 million. The Centauri food crisis of 2395, Jake added. Council committee formation time, 8 months. Human emergency food shipment deployment, 6 days. Estimated civilian casualties. Prevented, 7 million. The Arcturus refugee situation of 2398, Captain Henderson continued. Council diplomatic negotiations, ongoing after 2 years. Human refugee evacuation and resettlement, completed in 3 weeks. Total refugees relocated to safety, 2.4 million. Each statistic hit the chamber like a physical blow. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Council procedures prioritize process over results, while human aggressive tendencies prioritize saving lives over bureaucratic approval. Jake walked back to the center platform, and Lisa noticed that his entire posture had changed. He no longer carried himself like a diplomat seeking approval. He stood like what he was, a representative of a species that had spent 37 years politely tolerating condescension while quietly keeping galactic civilization from falling apart. So let's talk about humanity's aggressive tendencies, Jake said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber with crystal clarity. We aggressively save lives while you debate. We aggressively solve problems while you form committees. We aggressively protect civilians while you draft regulations. He paused, letting the words sink in. And for 37 years, we've aggressively pretended that this arrangement. The silence in the Great Hall stretched for nearly a full minute before Jake Morrison continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades of suppressed frustration. You want to understand humanity's place in galactic civilization? Jake said, gesturing to Captain Henderson, who activated a new set of displays. Let's look at the actual numbers instead of the diplomatic fiction we've all been pretending is reality. The holographic display above the center platform shifted to show resource allocation charts, military deployment statistics, and economic data that painted a stark picture of the galactic economy. Numbers filled the air in neat columns and graphs that several council members were clearly seeing for the first time. The Kepler 442 system contains 17 planets and 43 moons. Jake began, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a briefing to military officers. Current galactic law grants humanity mining rights to exactly 3 asteroids in the outer system. 3 asteroids out of 60 celestial bodies. Lisa Parker watched the council members' reactions as the numbers appeared in the air. Several were leaning forward, studying the data with expressions of surprise or confusion. Others were checking their personal devices, apparently trying to verify the information being presented. Those 3 asteroids represent approximately 0.3% of the available resources in the system, Captain Henderson added, his military bearing making even simple statistics sound like tactical intelligence. The same percentage that Speaker Vorthkod just proposed as our annual extraction limit. Jake stepped closer to the council seating area, and Lisa noticed that his movement had a different quality now. Not the careful approach of a diplomat seeking favor, but the confident stride of someone presenting evidence to a jury. Meanwhile, Jake continued, the same system contains a Valkyrie, automated research station that has been operating for 12 years without any council oversight whatsoever. This station has been extracting rare elements for scientific research at a rate that exceeds our proposed mining operations by a factor of 7. Speaker Vorthka's crystal skin had shifted to a distinctly uncomfortable shade of green. The Valkyrie research station operates under different protocols. It operates without any protocols. Dr. Patricia Wells interrupted, standing up with a tablet full of data. According to the environmental monitoring reports that the Valkyrie file annually, their research station has caused more atmospheric disruption to the system than human mining would cause in 50 years. The holographic display shifted to show environmental impact studies and monitoring data that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Charts showing atmospheric changes, gravitational disruptions, and resource depletion painted a picture of unchecked industrial activity. The ZEC have established cultural preservation sites on 7 worlds in the same system. Dr. Wells continued, her voice carrying the precision of a scientist presenting research findings. Worlds that have never contained sentient life according to every archaeological survey ever conducted. Representative K.L. K-Theta's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound that Jake had learned indicated extreme agitation. The spiritual significance of these sites cannot be measured by human archaeological methods. The sites didn't exist until 3 months ago, Dr. Wells replied flatly. ZEC cultural records show no mention of the Kepler 442 system until humanity submitted our mining request. The oldest ZEC spiritual marker in that system was installed 6 weeks after our initial application. The silence that followed was deafening. Several council members were now openly staring at the ZEC representative, their various species expressions of shock or anger becoming apparent even across vast biological differences. Jake gestured to the holographic display, which shifted to show even more comprehensive economic data. But let's discuss the broader picture of resource allocation in council space. The new charts showed mining operations, research facilities, and industrial installations across dozens of star systems. Color-coded indicators showed which species operated each facility and what percentage of extracted resources they were permitted to keep. Total human resource extraction in council space over the past 10 years, Jake announced 0.3% of available materials. Total Valkyrie resource extraction in the same period, 23%. Total ZEC extraction, 18%. Total Sorek extraction, 15%. The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. Lisa watched as council members began accessing their own databases, apparently trying to verify or challenge the human data. Now let's look at contributions to galactic civilization, Jake continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. Captain Henderson activated another display, showing military deployment statistics that made several council members visibly uncomfortable. Total human contribution to council defense forces, 34% of active military personnel. Total human contribution to emergency response operations, 67% of all personnel involved in crisis situations. Total human contribution to medical assistance across council space, 89% of all medical aid provided to non-human species. Representative HSS Kmore's scales had shifted to a pattern that Lisa recognized as extreme anxiety. These statistics may be accurate, but they do not account for the quality differences in contributions. You're right, Dr. Wells said, activating our own display. Let's discuss quality differences. The holographic display filled with medical research data, technological advancement reports, and scientific publication statistics that painted an even more stark picture of human contributions to galactic civilization. Human medical research has extended average lifespan across 7 different species by an average of 23%, Dr. Wells announced. Human agricultural technology has increased food production efficiency across council space by 45%. Human transportation innovations have reduced interstellar travel time by 31%. Human contributions to galactic scientific knowledge over the past decade, she continued, represent 47% of all published research, 62% of all technological patents, and 78% of all medical breakthroughs that have been applied across multiple species. Jake stepped back to the center platform, his posture radiating the confidence of someone who had just presented an airtight case. So let's summarize the actual relationship between humanity and the Council, he said, his voice carrying across the chamber with crystal clarity. We provide half the science, a third of the military protection, and two-thirds of the emergency response capability for a civilization that grants us less than 1% of available resources. We cure your diseases while you debate whether our medical research meets your standards. We protect your trade routes while you question whether our military responses are appropriate. We feed your populations while you form committees to study our agricultural methods. Captain Henderson stepped forward, his movement drawing attention like a magnet. Every major crisis in Council space over the past 30 years has been resolved by human intervention while Council procedures were still in the planning stages. The Procyon system collapse, he announced, activating a new display. Structural failure threatened to destroy the system's main space station and kill 4 million inhabitants. Council emergency response time, 14 hours to form a crisis committee. Human response time, 37 minutes. Result: complete evacuation and structural repair with 0 casualties. The Aldebaran plague outbreak, Dr. Wells added. Viral infection spreading across 3 species with a 67% mortality rate. Council medical response time, 6 months to approve emergency protocols. Human medical response time, 18 hours. Result: plague contained and eliminated with total casualties under 10,000 instead of the projected 40 million. The serious trade war, Jake continued. Economic conflict between 4 species threatening to destabilize galactic commerce. Council diplomatic resolution time, ongoing after 18 months of negotiations. Human economic intervention. Trade agreements established and implemented within 2 weeks. Each example hit the chamber like a hammer blow. The pattern was undeniable: human intervention measured in hours or days, Council procedures measured in months or years, and the difference between success and catastrophic failure measured in millions of lives. And through all of this, Jake said, his voice dropping to a tone that made several Council members lean forward to hear him, humanity has politely pretended that this arrangement represents some form of mutual cooperation instead of what it actually is. He paused, looking directly at each Council member in turn. A protection racket where we provide the protection and you collect the fees. The chamber erupted in chaos. Clicks, whistles, harmonic protests, and what Lisa assumed were various species equivalents of shouting filled the air. Translation systems struggled to keep up with the overlapping conversations as Council members argued among themselves, demanded explanations from their own delegations, and called for order. Through it all, the human delegation stood perfectly still, watching the pandemonium with expressions ranging from satisfaction to barely contained amusement. When Speaker Vorthkov finally managed to restore some semblance of order, his crystal skin was cycling rapidly through shades that Jake had never seen before. The Council cannot allow such inflammatory accusations. The silence that followed Jake Morrison's statement stretched across the great hall like a physical weight. Even the constant hum of translation machines seemed muted, as if the artificial intelligences were struggling to process concepts they had never encountered before. Lisa Parker watched the Council members with fascination. Some sat frozen in their seats, staring at the human delegation with expressions she couldn't quite read. Others were frantically accessing their personal devices, apparently trying to verify or challenge the data that had just been presented. A few were engaged in whispered conversations with their own staff members, their various species' body language indicating confusion or panic. Jake stood at the center platform, no longer the polite diplomat who had entered this chamber 12 hours ago. His posture radiated the quiet confidence of someone who had just played his final card and knew it was a winning hand. The Kepler 442 system, Jake continued, his voice cutting through the silence with surgical precision, will be developed by human mining operations according to human safety standards and human environmental protocols. Speaker Vorthka's crystal skin was cycling rapidly through colors that Lisa had never seen before. The Council cannot permit unilateral human action. The Council cannot permit it? Jake interrupted, his tone carrying a note of genuine curiosity. Speaker Vorthka, under what authority does the Council believe it can prevent human development of human space? Captain Henderson stepped forward, activating a new holographic display that showed legal documents and treaty texts. Article 12. Section 4 of the original Council Charter, he announced, his military bearing making even legal citations sound like tactical intelligence. Member species retain full sovereignty over resource development within their recognized territorial boundaries. The Kepler 442 system lies entirely within the boundaries of human space as defined by the original membership treaties. Dr. Patricia Wells added, her voice carrying the precision of someone who had spent years in legal battles. The nearest non-human territory is 17 light-years away. The nearest active alien operation is 23 light-years away. Jake gestured to the legal documents floating in the air above the platform. By the Council's own charter, this falls under human sovereign authority. We are not requesting permission to develop our own territory. We are informing you of our plans as a courtesy. The implications of this statement hit the Council like a shockwave. Several members began speaking at once, their translated voices creating a chaos of protests and demands. Through it all, the human delegation remained perfectly calm, watching the reaction with expressions ranging from satisfaction to barely concealed amusement. However, Jake continued, his voice rising above the tumult, humanity values our membership in the Council. We have no desire to destabilize the cooperative framework that has served galactic civilization for 3 millennia. The noise began to die down as Council members realized that Jake was still speaking. Therefore, Jake said, humanity proposes a new framework for our participation in galactic civilization, one that recognizes both our sovereign rights and the Council's legitimate interests in maintaining stability. The holographic display shifted to show a comprehensive document that was clearly the result of months or even years of preparation. Legal frameworks, resource-sharing agreements, environmental protocols, and security arrangements filled the display in carefully organized sections. The Human Cooperation Accord, Dr. Wells announced, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone unveiling a masterpiece. A framework for human participation in galactic civilization that acknowledges our contributions while respecting Council authority in areas of genuine mutual concern. Lisa scanned the document with growing amazement. It was brilliant, comprehensive, and completely restructured the relationship between humanity and the Council while maintaining the fiction that the Council retained ultimate authority. Under this accord, Captain Henderson explained, humanity would maintain full sovereignty over resource development within human space. However, we would voluntarily submit to Council mediation for any disputes that affect other species. Human military forces would continue to provide security for Council space, Jake added, but under formal mutual defense treaties rather than implied obligations. Human scientific and medical research would continue to benefit all Council species, but through formal technology sharing agreements that recognize the value of human contributions. The document floating above the platform was a work of legal and diplomatic art. It granted humanity everything they had been denied while offering the Council mechanisms to maintain influence through cooperation rather than control. This accord recognizes what has always been true, Jake said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. Humanity is not a junior partner in galactic civilization. We are a founding member of the Council with rights and responsibilities equal to any other species. Representative HSS Kmore's scales had shifted to a pattern that indicated extreme agitation. The Council requires time to study this proposal, of course, Jake replied, his diplomatic smile returning for the first time in hours. Take all the time you need. However, I should mention that humanity will begin operations in the Kepler 442 system in 6 months, regardless of the Council's decision. The statement was delivered with perfect politeness, but its meaning was crystal clear. Humanity would proceed with or without Council approval, but the Council could choose whether to maintain influence through cooperation or lose it through obstruction. You cannot simply ignore Council authority? exclaimed the Nethrum representative, their environmental suit cycling through what Lisa recognized as panic responses. Jake's expression didn't change. We're not ignoring council authority. We're exercising human authority within human space, as guaranteed by the original charter that every species in this chamber signed. Dr. Wells activated another display, this one showing the membership, agreements and territorial boundaries that had been established when each species joined the council. Every member species has exercised sovereign authority within their own territory throughout the history of the council. Humanity is simply doing what everyone else has always done. The difference, Captain Henderson added with military precision, is that we're informing you instead of asking permission. Speaker Vorthka's crystal skin had settled into a deep blue shade that Jake recognized as the Valkyrie equivalent of deep thought. The council must consider the broader implications of this proposal. Certainly, Jake replied. However, I should clarify something important. This is not a negotiation. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. The Human Cooperation Accord represents humanity's final offer for continued participation in the current council structure, Jake continued, his voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. You can accept it, reject it, or propose modifications. But you cannot prevent it. If the Council chooses to work with us under this framework, humanity will continue to provide the scientific research, medical aid, and military protection that has kept galactic civilization stable for the past 30 years. If the Council chooses to reject this framework, Jake paused, letting the implications sink in, humanity will continue to exercise our sovereign rights while the Council explains to its member species why human aid for medical emergencies, military crises, and technological development is no longer available. The silence that followed was deafening. Every being in the chamber understood exactly what Jake was saying. Humanity wasn't threatening war or dramatic ultimatums. They were simply stating that the era of one-sided cooperation was over. Lisa watched the council members as they began to grasp the full scope of their situation. They could have humanity as willing partners under terms that recognized human contributions, or they could have humanity as independent neighbors who felt no obligation to solve galactic problems for free. Representative KLK Theta's mandibles clicked nervously. Surely humanity would not abandon its humanitarian obligations. Our humanitarian obligations? Dr. Wells repeated, her voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. Representative KLK Theta, humanity has no legal obligation to provide medical aid, military protection, or technological assistance to species that consider us too dangerous to mine rocks in our own territory. We've been doing it because we believed in cooperative civilization, Jake added. But cooperation requires mutual respect and mutual benefit. The current arrangement provides neither. Captain Henderson stepped forward, his military bearing making him seem to fill the entire platform. Humanity will continue to help our friends and allies. The question before the Council is whether you want to be friends and allies, or whether you prefer to be neighbors who occasionally ask for favors. Speaker Vorthka raised one of his four arms, and the chamber fell silent. The Council will need to discuss this proposal extensively before reaching a decision, of course, Jake replied, his diplomatic tone returning. As I mentioned, you have 6 months to decide. Humanity will begin Kepler 442 operations on schedule regardless of your decision, but we hope it will be with Council cooperation rather than without it. As the human delegation began to file out of the chamber, Lisa heard Dr. Wells whisper to Captain Henderson,